Review of All Quiet on the Western Front by Eric Maria Remarque, 細線無戰事. The book is labeled as a novel, but is actually a reflection of the author's experience during the years as a young volunteer in the German army in the First World War. The author is represented by the central fictional character, Paul Balmer. The book begins with Paul comforting a young boyhood friend and classmate, Franz Kapperock, who was a fellow young volunteer suffering from a combat wound and dying in a field hospital. Toward the end of the book, another combat death occurred, this time an elder soldier and the author's mentor, Stanislas Kaczynski. In between was the scene of hand-to-hand combat, during which Paul killed a French soldier in a trench. For several hours, he watched the man die slowly and painfully. He felt remorse and asked forgiveness from the man's corpse. He was emotionally devastated. When he rejoined his comrades, they tried to comfort him and reassure him that it was only part of the war. At the end of the book, Paul fell in October 1918, on a day that was so quiet and still on the whole front that the Army report confined itself to the single sentence, "All quiet on the Western Front." There were descriptions of horrific combat wounds. Quote, "We see men living with their skulls blown open. We see soldiers run with their 2 feet cut off. We see men without mouths, without jaws, without faces." End of quote. Then there was the narrative when Paul and several of his comrades were wounded and taken to an army hospital. The Surgeon General of the hospital was keen on amputations, regardless of whether the procedure was necessary. On frequent occasions, patients in serious conditions were taken to the dying room. Returning from the dying room was extremely rare. Fortunately, it did occur to one of Paul's comrades. Out of such experiences, the author offered many memorable utterances and reflections. Quote, "We reached a zone where the front begins and becomes on the instant human animals." End of quote. Quote, "We were 18 and had begun to love life and the world, and we had instead shot it to pieces." Quote, "Terror can be endured so long as a man simply ducks, but it kills if a man thinks about it." Quote, "Every full-grown emperor requires at least one war, otherwise he will not become famous. And generals too, they become even more famous than emperors." End of quote. A most thoughtful and sensible proposal was made by Paul's friend, Albert Lopp. Quote, "He proposes that a declaration of war should be a kind of popular festival with entrance tickets and bands, like a bullfight. Then in the arena, the ministers and generals of the two countries, dressed in bathing drawers and armed with clubs, can have it out among themselves. Whoever survives, his country wins. That would be much simpler and more just than the present arrangement, where the wrong people do the fighting. All Quiet on the Western Front is considered by many the greatest war novel of all time. Be that as it may, it is doubtful that the author's wisdom, gained through painful personal experience and enunciated poignantly in the book, has made any significant impact in reducing the number of wars among nations, which are led by humans who, according to Mark Twain, was made at the end of the week's work when God was tired. End of review.